Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Let's turn to the book of Yaakov, actually get into the text this week. Last week, of course, I did the introduction. Yaakov, James the Just, and chapter 1. And I've found out, many of you may have heard, I don't have the privilege, I do not have the honor of standing here and teaching the book of James, specifically chapter 1, without scathing through and having to actually go through the trials and live it. So I'm going through a really tough time in my life, challenges, and I really see that truly this comes alive. I don't just get to stand up here and teach it, I have to live it. We all have to live it. But I definitely am not getting through unscathed on this one, let me tell you. So please, I ask for all of your prayers for myself, my family. Of course, when you put yourself out there like this, you know it comes back on you. You get a lot of attack, a lot of pushback. So anyway, I'm excited, though, to persevere. It's what we do. It's what I do. Thank you, double. It's what I do in the midst of the trial. It's what we do in the midst of the trial. Are we going to be succumb to evil and act out? Oh yeah, in my flesh. But we have to overcome that. Are we going to continue to walk in righteousness even when everything comes at us? That's the distinction that I'm really discovering, is not giving into those carnal impulses, but to raise above that and truly seek the peace of Yahuwah. And I do have his peace. And that is what gives me comfort and enables me to come and be able to teach this. But I believe that also I am getting particularly tested because I am teaching it. And it says, Yaakov says, do not desire to be teachers. And I can tell you, this is one of those instances when you can really see why. Yaakov, James, Yaakov, an Eved, a servant, an Eved of Yahuwah, and the master, Yahushua HaMashiach, to the 12 tribes who are scattered abroad among the nations in the galut, in the dispersion. Shalom. Shalom, my Israelite brothers. This is how the text opens up. And of course, we have to backtrack and we go, well, here we have it, right here, to all 12 tribes. And it's so easy to skim over that, but what does that tell us? That the words of the Master are actually true. This reveals that the majority of the so-called Jews were in fact what? None other than the synagogue of Satan, those who say they are Jews and who are not. Because if the real Jews had returned, as sacred history likes to teach, in 520 of before the Common Era, in the days of Ezra, then James would be addressing how many tribes? 9. Because apparently Benjamin, Levi, and Judah, they returned back to Israel in 520 before the Common Era, in the days of Ezra. But that's not the case, is it? This tells us, this is the half-brother of Yahusha, that in fact all 12 tribes are still in the exile, yet there were those in the land saying that they were Jews, but were in fact not, but the synagogue of Satan, that their father was not Yahuwah Elohim, but they were serving Satan. Now, recorded history tells us then that according to this text, in the first century, all 12 tribes were still in dispersion. And I'm telling you, Scripture is alive, is it not? Scripture is alive, and I believe we are living in a parallel universe, if you've got the eyes to see it. Because today, it's no different. Sacred history espouses that the Jews have returned to the land. Not in 520 before the Common Era, no. The Jews, they returned to the land in 1948. That's your sacred religious history, right? Wrong. Because in reality, just like our text, we have all 12 tribes are still where? In the galut, in the dispersion, and it is Mashiach who is going to gather in the exiles. Now, as we get into the text today, I want you to understand in your own time, you can look and see that the background to Yaakov is, in fact, the Sermon on the Mount, where his brother Yahusha spoke. Now, at the Sermon on the Mount, and you can see throughout the Brit Hadashah narrative, there were always those that would be in the very midst of Yahusha's teaching, sitting at his feet. And then there were always those that were on the outside, on the outskirts, looking in, never pressing in. And they were the ones that were trying to what? Ensnare Yahusha, imprison him, or bring him up before the Sanhedrin. I believe that Yaakov was not in the inner circle, because at the time when Mashiach walked, he wasn't a believer, was he? But I believe he was on the outskirts, particularly at the Sermon of the Mount address, looking in. Because there's so many parallels within the text that I think he heard that message. This is what I surmise just by going into the text. Because he was familiar with his brother's lingo. Very familiar with the language and the theme of what was spoken at the Sermon of the Mount. Look at verse 2. It's about getting a proper perspective. Count it all simcha, joy, when you fall into diverse trials. And of course, the Sermon on the Mount background to this is Matthew chapter 5, verse 10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for Tzedakah's righteousness' sake, for theirs is the Malchut HaShamayim, theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men shall revile you, and they shall persecute you, and shall say all manner of evil against you, falsely for my name's sake. That's the background for this verse right here. Now, this particular verse isn't talking about capitulating to sin, giving in to sin. The Greek word that's used here for fool is actually used in Luke chapter 10, verse 30, where a man fell among the thieves and he was beaten until he nearly died. So what does that tell you? It wasn't something of his own choosing. He fell among the thieves. It wasn't something of his own choosing. He didn't fall into sin. He fell into circumstances that were unavoidable, and they were very unexpected. That's what this text is talking about, which is very important, because people will use this as an excuse. Well, I just fell into sin. Well, no, that's not what this Greek word tells us. If you tie it in with Luke chapter 10, verse 30, the man fell in amongst the thieves. It was unexpected and unavoidable. He didn't intend for that to happen. It was falling into a situation of outward trials. Diverse trials in verse 2 is actually speaking to us as the Melchizedek generation, because it's talking of the Joseph generation. Because the Greek word poikilos that's used here for diverse is actually used in the Septuagint in Genesis 37, verse 3, where Joseph's tunic is of poikilos, diverse colors. So look at verse 3 now. We're going to see this begins with 6 basic tests for us to prove our faith. We're going to find there's 6 basic tests for us for proving our faith. Number 1, faith will be tested in response to Yahuwah's word. Particularly verse 19 to 27, you'll see that. Number 2, faith will be tested in how it responds to societal gulfs. How do we respond to the differences between people within society? there's rich, there's poor. How does our faith respond to societal goals? Number 3, faith will be tested by its production. Well, is your faith producing works? Or is it not? Number 4, faith will be tested by its exercise of self-control. Self-control. Number 5, faith will be tested by how it interacts with the world. Your reaction to worldliness. And number 6, faith will be tested on how it turns to prayer in all things. Do you turn to prayer when you're tested, or do you run to the government for handouts? I mean, what do you do when you're tested? You see, we're to turn to prayer. 6 things, where we can see the proving and trying of our faith. Our suffering is what tests and purifies our faith. Trials are what stretch and strengthen our faith. It's called the faith. Only the faith is the faith that saves, that will bring us through the trials. For Yaakov, a faith that saves is a faith that does what? It's a faith that produces works. A saving faith is a faith that produces works. A saving faith is a living faith, and it's the faith that purifies us because we are able to go through the trials, and it produces endurance. And that's what I find, is you get endurance, whereas other people will give up. But the more you go through trials and you have the faith to go through it, you know that Yahuwah is the Elohim of what? The last minute. Just when you think that you're going to give up and everything's going to break, and then Yahuwah comes through and delivers you right at that last plague. Right at that last plague, and you get trained and you have endurance where others would give up. You know that that's your Elohim. You know that that's your Elohim. That's his character. So that you know, if you're serving him, that guess what? You're going to have to go through the trials, and right when you're about to give up, you know that that's when your deliverance is nigh. Because it's happened before, and that's where you get your comfort. That's where I get my comfort. And I see other people dropping off to the left and to the right, and I continue to what? And you continue to stand. That's all we can do. Stand, and you shall see, Shemot, the glory of Yahuwah. You stand, and that's all you can do. Because you're so weak at that point, you don't even feel like praying. But you can stand, and you stand. It's amazing. It's amazing. So, when we're in the trials, though, we are commanded to ask for one thing. And if we ask for it, he will actually give it to us. And it's chokmah. It's a commandment. If you're in the trial, you are commanded to ask for wisdom. And he will give it to you. It's a promise. He will give it to you. But what is wisdom? What is chokmah? Mishlei, Proverbs, teaches that wisdom isn't mental aptitude, but the patience of righteousness in daily living. Look at verse 3. The 5 virtues of faith. Number 1 is patience. You've got to be patient. Number 2, that patience is going to build endurance. Number 3, that's going to bring fortitude. Number 4, that's going to bring steadfastness. Number 5, perseverance. This is the opposite. This is counterculture. This is everything. This is the antithesis of the 21st century, where everything is instant, now. Oh, well, I'm done then. Right? Forget it then. I need it now. You see, the faith is patience, endurance, fortitude, steadfastness, and perseverance. That is faith. It's not, and I've said it 100 times, microwave faith. It's crockpot faith. Slow cook. It is. Verse 3, knowing this, that the trying, the Greek word here, is dokimion. The trying, dokimion, of your emunah, faith, produces patience, but let patience be perfect. The Greek word here is teleos. It may be a perfect teleos work, that you may be perfect and complete, wanting nothing. And of course, when we look now at verse 4, we can find the background in Matthew chapter 5, verse 48, the Sermon on the Mount. Therefore, become perfect, teleos, even as your Abba, your Father who is in the Shamayim, the heavens, is perfect. So I believe that Yaakov was on the outside listening to his brother at the Sermon on the Mount. He had not yet become a believer, and he was outside with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and they were like, what is he talking? But he listened and he heard, and now, as a believer, regenerated, he is now speaking what he heard his brother speak all those years before. Teleos, perfect in the Greek. The Hebrew word for perfect is tamin, which is tied directly, listen, it's tied directly to the priesthood, because it's used to speak of the quality of the sacrifices. So now we've got priestly sacrificial language that is being applied to who? The followers of Yahusha, particularly those who are listening to the homily of Yaakov the just, Yaakov the Tzaddik. This is amazing. If you bear with the language and you just don't brush over it, this is particularly priestly sacrificial language that is now being applied to believers who are following the Melchizedek, because this Greek word here, teleos or tamin, is used to speak of the quality of the animal sacrifices in the past. But Yaakov is speaking to the Melchizedek priesthood and how they're to be blameless, just as Shaul said to the Romans, live as sacrifices, Romans 12, right? Live as sacrifices. Teleos means to submit to the will of Yahuwah in completion, maturity, perfection. I need to be whole. You need to be undamaged, and we need to be intact. That's what it really means. You can't just pick out a few things in your religious walk and say, well, I'm just going to do that, because that's not what it's talking about. This pertains to attitudes. This pertains to ethics and how we deal with conflict amongst one another. You can't just say, well, that person is complete because they've got a head covering and a long beard, because you're just picking out something from the faith when this is talking about a deeper work, ethics, attitudes, and being able to get along one with another. Verse 5, if any of you lack chokmah, wisdom, let him ask of Yahuwah, who gives to all men liberally, without reproach, and it shall be given to him. Of course, verse 5 has its background in Matthew chapter 7, verse 7. Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find it. Knock, and it shall be open to you. And we know from Mishlei, from Proverbs 9 verse 10, the fear of Yahuwah is the genesis, in the Greek, the genesis or the beginning of chokmah. So you have to fear Yahuwah. You'll never have wisdom if you're not afraid of him. In a healthy manner, as in you know that your faith will produce works that are pleasing and you become that living sacrifice. In the Septuagint, in Mishlei, Proverbs 27 verse 21, it says, fire is the trial, and we find the same Greek word here, dokimion. Fire is the trial, dokimion, for silver and gold, and man is tried. We are tried. You see, faith, or emunah in the Hebrew, in the Septuagint comes across in the Greek as pistis. Pistis, faith, means fidelity, commitment. Yaakov, James, is committed to a faith, and that is what drives the whole of this homily. Look at verse 6. But let him ask in emunah, faith, nothing wavering. For he that wavers is like a wave of the sea driven with the wind and is tossed. For let not that man think that he shall receive anything from the Master Yahuwah. A double-minded man is unstable in all of his ways. Double-minded. In the Hebrew, it means double-souled. Double-souled. Like a man with two souls. One set on Yahuwah, well, and the other one's just set on the world. You're a double-souled man. That is so common today in the institutionalized church. Double-souled men. And then it goes down through the generations. 1 Chronicles 12, verse 33, and Psalms 12, verse 2. A man with a heart within a heart. Double-hearted, double-souled, you see? That's not the kind of man that Yahuwah calls us to be. One set on Yahuwah and another set on the world. Do not be double-hearted. Do not be double-souled. Look at verse 9. Let the brother of low degree, Gilah, rejoice in that he is exalted. And the background Sermon on the Mount, of course, is Matthew 5, verse 3. Blessed are the poor in Ruach, for theirs is the Malchut HaShamayim, the kingdom of Yahuwah. Verse 10, but the rich in that he is made low, because as the flower of the grass, he shall pass away. For the sun is no sooner risen with a burning heat, so that it withers the grass, and the flower fails, and the pretty appearance of it perishes. So all shall the rich man also fade away in the course of his Chaim, his life. You see, the poor brother has the right to express proudly his spiritual wealth. That's what this is talking about. The poor, they have the right to express proudly their spiritual wealth, because that's all they've got. So let the poor, let them be a little mad and bold and zealous. Let them be jazzed up and bold about the faith, because that's what they've got. That is their riches, and let them be proud about their spiritual wealth. Because Yahuwah does, in fact, want some brethren to be poor. So the prosperity gospel isn't going to work. Because Yahuwah does, in fact, want some people to be poor. Because he uses poverty to test believers. Now, wildflowers, the background to this, of course, is the wildflowers and their brief life in the land of Israel, Etz Israel. Because what would happen is these wildflowers, they would pop up in Israel at the end of Aviv. Right after Passover, you'd find these wildflowers popping up all over the barren countryside. And then, right at the end of the month of Iyar, the strong winds would come in and they would burn with a fervent heat and be gone. Just like that. You see, the rich man needs to recognize the vanity of wealth, the transitionary life of riches. Oh yes, the riches, they arise just like those wildflowers right after Passover. But then they wither, the riches begin to wither, the rich man withers, and then, like the flower, will fall, eventually perish by the way of the scorching winds. You see, the flower's life is brief, is what Yaakov is communicating to his audience. The flower's life is brief. The application is likewise the rich man will eventually fade. So he too should glory in what? What should the rich glory in? That like the flower, he also will be brought low. So the rich man is to glory not in his riches, but just like the flower, that he too will be brought low, and his confidence, his boasting is not in the riches, but in the knowledge that he too will be brought low, and in the lowness will be actually rich. That's a true rich man. Does that make sense? That's what he's communicating here. The rich man has to admit that his wealth cannot bring him close to Yahuwah. He comes to Yahuwah by the same way as the poor. Don't oppress the poor. Yaakov is hearkening back right here to the prophets when they chastised the fatted calves in league with the ruling class of Israel. You see, Yaakov's audience, they were poor. And they were in subjection to the rich class in Jerusalem. But when the rich did come into the household of the faith, Yaakov was espousing that they were no different than the poor, because they would often be made low. They would often be made low from their former socio-religious sphere. And this is what he was communicating. You see, the rich would come into the assembly in Jerusalem, and because they chose to follow the narrow path, they were rejected by the rich in the religious class. And we find that today. You can have wealthy that could come into the assembly, into maybe this assembly or another assembly that teaches this message, and that rich will be rejected from the socio class that they used to walk in, because they're no longer part of the institutionalized church country club of the rich. And now they won't have the friends that they used to have. And this is the persecution that they were seeing at the time, which is very interesting. They were made low from their former socio-religious sphere. Maybe today we'd see it, well, not invited to the Bible studies that maybe you once were invited to, or the golf clubs that you were once invited to with the other church members. But, that's a modern application, but I'm trying to communicate this is what was happening in Jerusalem at the time, because there were rich that were coming in, but they were also suffering from a rejection of the religious class in Jerusalem, because they decided to follow the narrow path instead of the broad road. Does that make sense? Look at verse 12. Blessed is the man that endures trials, for when he is tried, he shall receive the keter of Chaim, the crown of life, that Yahuwah has promised to those that love him. And of course, the Sermon on the Mount background to this is Matthew 7:14. Narrow is the gate, and difficult is the way that leads to Chaim, and few there will find it. The crown of life. We are promised a crown of life, a keter Chaim. And there's two words in the Greek for crown, which is very telling. One of the Greek words is diadem, and the other Greek word for crown is Stephanos. Stephanos, where we get Stephen, Stephanos. So you have to remember the background to Yaakov is what? The stoning of Stephanos. So the Greek word here is not diadem, but it is in fact Stephanos. What is he trying to communicate to his audience that just witnessed, or this is the culture where Stephanos was just stoned to death? The first martyr of the faith, the crown of life, the Stephanos. It's not the diadem, because a diadem would mean like a royal crown that a king would wear. Whereas the Stephanos, that was the crown of an overcomer. And that's the crown. We're not to try and pump ourselves up as kings, but we are to realize that the crown that we get is because we overcame. And maybe, like Stephanos, It might be even at the cost of martyrdom. Revelation 2, verse 10. Look at verse 13. Let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted by Yahuwah, for Yahuwah cannot be tempted with evil, neither does he tempt any man. So now we're going to look at the origin of temptation. Temptation does not come from Yahuwah. Can we all agree on that? The origin of temptation. Temptation does not come from Yahuwah. Yahuwah is untemptable. And you have to be careful of the institutionalized church doublespeak here. Because in the church, institutionalized, you will hear many a time, well, yes, we believe that Jesus is God. And then they'll take you to Matthew 4, and there might even be a movie called The Temptation of Christ. Well, hang on a minute. What does it just say right here? It says that Elohim is untemptable, right? So what was going on in Matthew 4 if we're talking about the Echad, the plurality of the Echad Elohim? Because the Greek word here for tempt is perezio, which comes from the Hebrew nasar. It's not tempt, it means to test, to attempt, adventure, assay, or prove, as in Genesis chapter 22, verse 1, where Yahuwah tried or tested Abraham. Look at verse 14. But every man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own desires and is taken away. Then when desire has conceived, it births sin, and sin, when it is spread, it brings forth death. Do not go astray, my beloved Israelite brothers. Now, drawn away means to be lured by the bait. That's what it literally means, to be lured by the bait. You see, different fish succumb to different bait, right? You see, Satan roams around like a lion trying to find out what kind of bait you like. That's basically what he's trying to do. What is the bait that you like? What tempts you may not tempt you, may not tempt me. So he's looking for the particular bait so he can hook you, the weakness, the carnality that is your particular vice. And he seeks whom he can bait. He knows what bait you desire, so we need to be what? We've got to be vigilant. And we know that we have now this desire, which then conceives, which then brings forth sin, that when it's fully grown brings forth death. This four-stage walk to death. Desire. There's nothing wrong with desiring things, but you then have to watch out that it does not conceive, because then once it conceives, it's going to bring forth sin, which then will bring forth death. We have to stop the spread by fleeing, by making teshuvah, repentance, and by confessing our sins one to another. Sin will lead to Yahuwah's discipline, which can actually result in physical death. And there's a family tree. I mean, Yahuwah tells us in his attributes that he visits the sins of the fathers to the third and fourth generation. Look at the family tree of sin to the third generation. It's literally a family tree of sin, and the only way that you can overcome it is by cutting it at the root. This is a 3-generational sin. Look at it. Lust is the mother of sin and the grandmother of death. Lust is the mother of sin and the grandmother of death. Lust is the sin nature, is the grandmother, and we see lust is the sin nature, is the grandmother, sin is the mother, and death is the daughter. And the result of sin, the daughter, death. Lust, just like the harlot, entices and seduces those that it desires. And how many believers are led astray concerning the true source of temptation? If you don't understand the source of temptation, then you'll be led away because you've not been convicted on the true source of temptation. I mean, do you know how many times I have heard, whether it's pastors or just people come to me and say, well, the enemy's just out to get me. Or do you know that the enemy did this to me? The enemy did that to me. What? Have you ever heard people say that to you? Yep. It's quite common, isn't it? Well, hang on a minute. Let's back up. They're deceived as to the true source of temptation and their responsibility to it. How about that? Responsibility. Responsibility to it. When they fall, they blame the devil, or worse, say it was Yahweh's plan for them, and they use biblical characters like Joseph, for examples. I mean, come on. Yahuwah tests us, yes, but he doesn't solicit us for evil, does he? He does not solicit us for evil. Joseph was thrown in prison for righteousness' sake. Not for falling prey to the progression of sin and the consequences of sin. That's not why Joseph was in prison. So we have to be careful when we pull these abstract biblical characters and try to apply them to our lives, when in reality we need to take responsibility for sinning. And the devil didn't do it to you. You did it to yourself. Because your desires conceived and led to sin that's bringing about death in your life. And if you don't repent, you'll actually die a physical death. You really will. It's actually biblical math. How about that? It's all too easy to blame Satan, demons. Well, blame those demons. You can blame people. You can blame the environment. You can blame the circumstance of your birth, your childhood experiences. But reconciliation to Yahuwah will never come about until we take full responsibility of our decisions that led to the fall in the first place. How long do you want to remain in bondage? How long do you want to remain in bondage? There's no one else to blame but your desires. Verse 17, every tov, every good gift, and every perfect gift is from above, and it comes down from the Abba of lights, in whom there is no changing or shadow of turning. Of course, this is talking about the celestials. Yahuwah will never be eclipsed. His light, it's unvarying. It's consistent. His light is dependable. And in him there is no darkness, because there's no dimming. In Yahuwah's light means there is no dimming in his kedushah, in his holiness. His holiness will not dim or flicker like a flame. His kedushah is always burning bright, which means he is totally incapable of being tempted with sin or to tempt man with sin. We have to understand that. Because if we don't understand the origins of it, then we will not overcome it. Verse 18. Of his own will, he brought us forth with the Torah of Emet, the Torah of truth, that we should be the Bikurim, the first fruits of his recreation. Bikurim in the Hebrew, or first fruits. The Greek word here is aparche. In the past, this word was connected to the Levitical priesthood. But here, a word that was connected to the Levitical priesthood is actually applied to the Melchizedek priests. Again, we're seeing these linguistic parallels of a word that was used in priestly language is brought forth and used in the priesthood that Yaakov is talking about. Why the priestly language Why is this attributed to believers if there is no Melchizedek priesthood that exists? Why do that? Why do that? Why put that in the language if there is no priesthood? Why not use another word? Why is he pulling out priestly language and applying it to believers if there is no priesthood? He is communicating, Yaakov the just, exactly what's going on. This verse, again, is one amongst many that shows that believers in Yahusha, being first fruits, are by extension to be associated with a priestly class and calling. 1 Peter 2:5 is not some isolated text that some would like it to be. We build and build as we go through, don't we? More and more and more. Look at verse 19. Verse 19. So then, my beloved Israelite brothers, let every man be swift to hear, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Now, this one's for me. This one's for me. For the wrath of man does not bring about the Zadakah of Yahuwah. This I have learned and am in the process of continually learning with raising my children. I want my children to be righteous. But me being angry at my children is not going to bring about the righteousness of Yahuwah. Me being angry is just me communicating that I didn't get something that I wanted. That's what I've come to realize. I wanted quiet when I was studying and I didn't get it, so I got mad. I raised my voice. I wanted something and I didn't get it. It's selfish desire, because the wrath of man will never bring about the righteousness of Yahuwah. And I am committed to the righteousness of Yahuwah in my children, which means I can't get angry at them. Raising my voice. This is a work in progress for me. But this verse has really, really convicted me in my life, big time. Because then I have to stop and I go, well, why am I actually wrathful right now? And it's usually because I didn't get something that I wanted. Usually revolves around quiet study time, my own personal space, my own desires, those types of things. The wrath of man does not bring about the Zadakah, the righteousness of Yahuwah. And of course, Matthew 5:22, the Sermon on the Mount, background here. And I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the mishpat, the judgment. And whoever shall say to his brother, Rakah, you degenerate imbecile, they shall be in danger of the Sanhedrin. But whoever shall say, you half-wit, shall be in danger of hell. Don't speak rashly or unreasonably. We need to take pause before thinking. And those are some great words that you would like to use. I put them in here because they really resonate with me. I think I heard them many a time back in England. You degenerate imbecile. You half-wit. Rakah! So from the text so far, down here, 19 verses later, I'd surmise so far from the text that the poor within the congregation were resentful of the rich. Could you see that so far? The poor within the congregation, they were resentful of the rich. Maybe even justifying stealing from them. Well, they've got more than I do. They won't miss it. Maybe even justifying stealing from them. You see, they'd gotten very angry at the rich, and they were speaking things without thinking. They were speaking things without thinking. And we do know the background of this, that many people had been forced out of Judea. They'd left everything behind and they were in poverty. And others, they had left Judea early with all of their riches, and they had the wisdom and the hindsight to get out first, and so they weren't in poverty. And so you can imagine there's some tension going on. Well, I left all my trash back in Jerusalem. How come you've got... Well, we were paying attention. I think it might happen in our day too. You have to try and have some foresight, but ultimately we all need to come together and realize that whether we're rich or poor, our end is the same, that we rejoice in our lowliness. But I believe that was some of the vexation that was going on at the time within the assembly. We know from Acts 11, verse 19, that many believers had been forced out of Judea, and they were resentful, and they were harboring bitterness towards others that had more within the congregation. Look in verse 19, 3 things. Be swift to Shema, hear the word of Yahuwah. Shema, meaning to bring into oneself, to assimilate, means to be ready and eager and having an ability to do. So if we're truly going to hear, we're going to be swift to bring the word of Yahuwah into us and assimilate it into our life. That's truly hearing. That's not just like listening to some sermonese, but it's hearing the word of Yahuwah, bringing it into our lives and assimilating it. That's to truly Shema. Number 2, be slow to speak. We have to allow time to fully comprehend what's being taught so we can really apprehend what's being taught. Totally and thoughtfully evaluate what's being heard. Do you know how many emails that we've got from people that have listened 30 minutes into a teaching and then start to rebut the teaching? And you're like, but you haven't fully heard it. How can you put out a rebuttal? We've been doing this for years, and there's like a 6th edition, a 7th edition. We're now like, and you need to do your due diligence, because right now you're embarrassing yourself, showing that you spoke rashly without fully hearing a matter. And there's a proverb about that. Do your due diligence before you start speaking out about something, because by your words you'll show yourself a fool. Better be silent and others think that you're wise. Number 3, be slow to wrath. How many people become angry and resentful to you or to me when you start showing them verses in the scripture of how Yahuwah has called us to live? How many times have you tried to show people in the Word how Yahuwah has called us to live, and they become angry and resentful of you? Those stuck within the institutionalized church are some of the worst at harboring resentful feelings over the Word and what it actually demands of believers. Right? Some of the worst at harboring bitter feelings when somebody calls attention to the demands of the Word. Because this thing, it actually demands of you. You cannot read it and do nothing with it. It has demands upon you. It truly does. We need to practice these 3 things: being swift to hear, being slow to speak, and slow to wrath, because these 3 things, verse 20, the wrath of man doesn't produce the righteousness of Yahuwah. So, we find so far in these 20 verses, to be righteous is to be slow to wrath, because wrath as a quality, it's not reserved for me. Wrath is not reserved for you. Wrath is reserved solely for Yahuwah. And there's 4 different personality types. 4 different personality types. Number 1, easily angered, easily calmed. That's a man who loses what he gains. Oh yes, you're easily angered, but you're easily calmed. Whatever you gain, you'll lose it. It's like you got holes in your pockets. Number 2, there's a man who's hard to anger, but he's hard to calm. What he loses, he gains. What he loses, he gains. And third, there's a man who's hard to anger and easy to calm. Truly a righteous man. And number 4, there's a man easy to anger and hard to calm. Truly a wicked man. Truly a wicked man. You see, we live in a culture today where it's about psychology. It's not about the Psalms. I mean, read the Psalms. I mean, it's balm to my soul in these times when literally James 1 is my life. How about that? It's not psychology that comforts me, but it is praying the Psalms in the morning. I pray, Yahuwah, that you would rain down vengeance upon thine enemies. I love those verses. I do. And I do pray them like that. Yes, it says it right here. Just going to insert me for that and them for there. But you see, we live in this crazy culture of psychology, of psychosis, don't we? Psychologists will claim that emotions, since they're natural products of your personality, they can't truly be fully controlled. Did you know that, Chuck? That your emotions cannot be fully controlled. They can only be suppressed and ignored. That's what psychologists would say. That your emotions as products of your natural personality, they cannot be controlled. They can only be suppressed or ignored. And why would you want to do that? Don't suppress yourself. Let it all out. Feeling like a woman today, are you? Well, yes, I am. I think I'll use the ladies' loo. I mean, my goodness. I want to go with some guys with about 5 days growth and a bunch of hunting clothes just smelling out and say, walk into the lake. Yeah, I'm feeling like a woman today. What are you going to do about it? I mean, seriously, these are the laws that they're putting in place. You got a problem with that? But the Psalms tell us different, don't they? You see, that I'm being facetious, but you see the result, the insanity, when you follow their reasoning, their psychology, their psychosis to its end. You have this whole loo, bathroom issue. But the Psalms tell us different. Emotions are the product of the whole person, body, spirit, soul, mind. And through the work of the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, we can actually be transformed so as to bring our emotions and senses in line with Yahuwah's word. That's amazing. I have literally had my senses come in line with Yahuwah's word. Because if you allow the Ruach HaKodesh to regenerate your heart, it will actually permeate the mind and then change the senses. Something that once smelled good to you, when the heart has been regenerated, the senses will now make that smell repulsive. Something that acoustically, that's a big word for me this afternoon, sounded good to you, because there was a conviction in the heart, that noise, that music is an abomination. That is the Psalms, and that is in antithesis to our culture and psychology. We are the ones that witness that the word of Yahuwah transforming the heart can change the mind and the senses. That is the living, powerful, breathing word that I can stand before you without a shadow of doubt in my life and say that Yahusha is risen from the dead and Yahuwah is the one true living Elohim, because I've experienced him in my mind, my heart, my senses, and so have you. My smell. I've literally smelt Yahusha, and he smells like showbread. I mean, amazing. We've smelt his presence come in prayer time. And then something that once smelt good to me now is an abominable smell. Isn't that amazing? The Psalms can truly teach you this. Look at verse 21. The prerequisites to receiving the word for discipleship. Therefore, lay aside all filthiness and the multitude of evils, and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your beings. You see, the word of Yahuwah is a seed. We must receive that seed. And how do we do that? By putting asunder all filthiness and overflow of wickedness. You're only really going to be able to receive the seed if you put asunder all filthiness and overflow of wickedness. Because the word of Yahuwah, listen, it will not grow in a polluted petri dish. The word of Yahuwah will not grow in a polluted petri dish. Whatever is morally defiling must be stripped off. It has to be. Whatever is morally defiling has to be stripped off. And I'm not going to go into the details, but I will tell you, when I got converted when I was 24 years old, the seed came into my heart. I was regenerated and I was convicted, and I had to face some huge things in the petri dish. Now, if I chose to leave them in there, then the word would not have produced and been able to grow in that petri dish. Yes, I had received it. Yes, and I received the word. But then I went home and I was brought to my awareness that the petri dish of my life was defiled. And I knew that if that conversion was true and that if I was going to overcome, that I had to remove. And those things were huge. And now it's things that maybe you can't see, aren't as obvious, but it's still a process. But for that growth to occur, we have to cleanse the petri dish of our lives. We must strip away what is morally defiling out of our lives. I feel a poetic mood has descended upon me. I do. I think it's reading all this James lately. He's quite poetic. And he actually does pull from many of the sages, many of the Greek sages of the time, Jewish, Philo, but he does pull some of his language that he brings in. Of course, the ships, the fire. This was all very, very prior to the first century and first century writings in the Greek and Hebrew culture. But if you dock the boat of wickedness in the harbor of your heart, the seas of holiness will never come ashore. That's very poetic, isn't it? That was a late night one there. That was. I think I cried out to you when if you dock the boat of wickedness in the harbor of your heart, the seas of holiness will never come ashore. See, my mum always said I would be good on the stage. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that. She tried to push me into theater class when I was younger. But I was too busy defiling the petri dish. But believers truly, though, in all seriousness, They are called to receive the word of Yahuwah in sense of obeying its commands. If you don't keep the commandments, I've learned this, you can't say that you've received the implanted word. The test of salvation is whether the word was implanted at the instant of initial belief, at regeneration. And then that word becomes rooted in the heart. It's a plant. It becomes rooted in the heart, and then you've got to allow it to grow. But the only way you can allow it to grow is by cleansing what is morally defiling and setting up a culture of holiness in your life that allows the word to grow in your life, giving you and its ability to come into fruition, and the fruition of the word. Not initially, but if you allow it to grow, its end result is what? The saving of your souls. But if you never allowed it to grow to its fullness, are you saved? You see, this is when you look at it agriculturally, yes, you accept the Lord and the seed comes into your heart. But now, that's the first stage. Are you going to stay morally defiled? Because that seed will wither and die. Oh, you can now fake it because you'll have a lot of Christianese. You'll be familiar with the Bible. You can fake it to men. And you can recount, well, back here, this happened then. But unless there's this continual introspection of kedushah, holiness, then that word isn't going to grow in you. And if it doesn't grow within you, it cannot reach its goal, which is the saving of your soul. This is agricultural. Isn't that amazing? Receiving the word, then, it isn't enough. You can't say that. Receiving the word isn't enough, is it? It's not enough. See, the lies of Babylon will tell you that it is, but it's not enough. The receiving of the word isn't enough. It must be followed by active obedience and practice. True believers submit to the word's authority and they comply with all of its requirements. It is our reasonable service. It's our reasonable service, Romans 12. Look at verse 22. But be doers of the Torah and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. And of course, the Sermon on the Mount background, verse 22, is Matthew 7:24. Leave your gift before the altar and go your way. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. Verse 23, back in our text. For if any be a hearer of the Torah and not a doer, he is like a man beholding his natural face in a mirror, for he sees himself and goes away and immediately forgets what type of man he was. Now we have to understand their mirrors weren't like, our mirrors today. They were, brass things. So you wouldn't see a perfect representation of yourself. It wasn't what we have today. But the mirror would reveal something that could not otherwise be discerned. That's what a mirror does. It reveals something that could not otherwise be discerned. But the hearer only gazes and sees something that requires attention, but he leaves and then he forgets what he saw, right? He leaves and he forgets what he saw. He forgets what manner of man he actually is. He just goes about in a sustained state of imperfection. That's what Yaakov is trying to communicate. Then, guess what? Well, I'm just going to avoid mirrors then, right? 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 Well, don't you be sharing. I'll read it at home alone without anyone around. My own interpretation is just me and Jesus. Because they're going to avoid the mirror. Right? Because the mirror, the word, calls what? Your attention to your imperfections. But the one that walks away from the mirror, he just goes about in a sustained state of imperfection, then avoids mirrors or where mirrors congregate. And after a while, he even forgets that he has any imperfections at all, right? You hold yourself to maybe the standard of the culture, the religious culture, not the culture of the word. Natural face in the text here is actually Genesis face in the Greek. He beholds his Genesis face. This is very telling. We need to behold our Genesis face, see our imperfections, and return to our Genesis covenant. Yaakov addressing the Genesis face. In contrast, the doer lays the mirror down. The doer, he looks in the mirror, sees the imperfection, then he lays the mirror down and then starts to really work on the imperfections with two hands, the blackheads and all. Rather than just like, oh, it looks pretty good, put a bit of concealer on that and go. No, he lays the mirror down and gets to work on what they see. That's the doer of the word. They lay the mirror down and they then try to expose. They're like a picker, you know? You know those people that just pick? They're like, oh, right, yes, let's get busy. Hang on, yep. And then that's what they're like. They are on it. Yep, there's the one people. Oh, for crying out loud. Let's get the steamer towel out. And I mean, they're truly. But that's what we're supposed to be like. Sorry, but no, that's gross, but it's true. They lay the mirror down two-handed to go at the imperfections because they're trying to expose all of their blemishes so that they can address those blemishes through the word. And how do you address those blemishes through the word? Look what it says. He looks into the perfect law, the law of liberty. So then that raises the question, of course, what is the law of liberty? It's a good question, I think. In context and the language, this bears it up. It's the what? It's the Genesis face. It's the Genesis face, where Abraham's face met Yahuwah at the covenants of promises, Genesis 12 and 15. It's the Genesis face where Abraham was brought into the law of liberty, the Genesis face of self-examination. The word of Yahuwah is the Genesis mirror that shows the Genesis face that leads you back to the Genesis law of liberty. The Melchizedek covenant adherents are the doers of the word because they examine their Genesis face. And this is what the text says. Natural face is Genesis face in the Septuagint. Look at verse 25. But whoever looks into the perfect law of liberty. You have to ask yourself the question. Did the Levites live within the perfect law of liberty and freedom? Or were there severe restrictions placed upon the priesthood and the people? It goes without saying. There were severe restrictions placed upon the Levitical priesthood and the people. That is not a law of liberty. Did the patriarchs, on the other hand, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, live within the perfect law of liberty in an unrestricted realm of covenant fidelity? Yes, they did. They were in covenant in an unrestricted realm of Torah, whereas the Levitical priesthood was in a limited, restricted realm of law. It wasn't liberty, it was the schoolmaster or tutor that kept them. That was what the Levitical law or Levitical priesthood was. And continues in it, he will not be a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the mitzvot. This man shall be blessed in all his mitzvot. You see, we have to come to the understanding that Yahuwah freed Israel from its bondage in Egypt. And what did he do that for? He freed them from slavery so that he could enslave them under the law. Oh, well, that makes sense. No, it doesn't. That's insanity. But that's what religion teaches you. He freed them from slavery so he could shackle them to the law. Well, now we've just traded Pharaoh, one tyrant, for another. So your view of the father is that he's a tyrant that enslaves his children. No. He freed you from slavery so he could bring you to the mountain, Exodus 24, and give you the book of the covenant, which is the law of liberty. The Torah of freedom, liberty of covenant. No longer in bondage, but you're in covenant. They were brought into the book of the covenant so that they would be free and that they would be blessed. It was only later, after they were unfaithful at the golden calf, that restrictions, the schoolmaster and curses, plural, were put on Israel. Thus, the Torah of liberty identified can be none other than book of the covenant Torah. The law of liberty is the perfect law spoken by Yaakov, given by Yahuwah in order to safeguard the freedom he secured for Israel. It was only later, after the golden calf, that the Levitical priesthood was the schoolmaster or the book of the law that restricted them and put them under bondage until the time of Reformation, when the seed would come. Not so that the seed would come and deliver us from Torah, that would make us anomia, lawless, but he would return us back to the perfect law, which is covenant Torah, which is what Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov did all the way through to the book of the covenant. This is amazing, because the book of the covenant, Torah, safeguards our liberty. It protects us from the enslavement to men's doctrines and men's dogma. Once divorced from the book of the covenant, Torah, in Exodus 32, any law bears children unto what? Bondage. Galatians 4:24. Until the ruach of regeneration is imparted with bringing about the new covenant Torah, spanning back to the book of the covenant in Exodus 24. We finish up now in the final two verses, the most important being verse 27. If any man among you seems to be an eved, a slave of the master, and he controls not his tongue, he deceives his own heart, and this man's service is in vain. Pure and undefiled service to Yahuwah is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and keep himself unspotted from this world. The call of the priesthood is truly to keep oneself unspotted from the world and to go and visit the sick and go and visit the fatherless. That's truly the calling. Many people will contact us and say, well, what does it look like to walk in the priesthood? Maybe there's children's hospital. Maybe there's, I've gone into some of these old people's homes, and they're terrible places. The smell is just, It's outrageous. And it breaks your heart. They roll these old people out in the morning. They sit them in front of Oprah. And no, they do. That's what we need to be doing. That's the call, visiting those. This is the true call. Pure and undefiled service to Yahuwah is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction and keep himself unspotted from the world. That's the deep work, isn't it? Questions, comments, Brother Steve in the back? No. Good, excellent. Well, Yahuwah, we thank you so much as we go through the homily of Yaakov, the homily of James. Abba, that you would change, transform, and permeate our lives. Abba, as your word takes root in our heart, that Abba, it would now cause us to cleanse ourselves morally and spiritually to enable the growth of your word, that Abba, that it would bring about the fruition of saving our souls. We thank you, Abba, for this time. We thank you for what you are doing and have done, past, present, and what you will do future. In Yahusha's mighty name. Amen. Amen.